On your campaign website, you said another priority of yours includes putting Kansas back to work. If elected, how would you stimulate job growth in this district specifically?
This district specifically relies on the transportation system. We need a well-funded, well-maintained transportation system. Simply building the roads and bridges and stimulates the economy through job creation, and then maintaining those roads and bridges also helps drive businesses to our community, to have companies like Walmart and American Eagle come in and create jobs for our community.
Part of the big part, I guess, of jobs around this area in Franklin County would be related to agriculture. Do you have any experience in agriculture?
I don't have much experience in agriculture, but I have had family members involved in agriculture. I understand what the needs of agriculture, and a big issue that is hurting people in agriculture is high property taxes. We need to make sure that property taxes are kept low so that people can continue to be involved in agriculture. It's a very important part of our economy, and we need to make sure that's not being hurt.
After Kansas' new budget was passed, the legislature's research staff projected that a combination of income and sales tax cuts would create a large budget shortfall that could increase to $2.5 billion by 2008. Do you find any problems with Kansas' new budget?
Yes, I find a lot of problems, particularly with the fact that it's going to put a $2.5 billion deficit in our budget. It's not going to leave much for our schools and for our transportation system. It's not going to leave much of it for anything. I mean, we're going to have to cut everything across the board 40%. And after 2 years of seeing deep cuts, it's going to fundamentally change the state. And I don't think it's going to change the state for the better.
What kind of suggestions might you have when addressing the budget if you were elected in the next session?
Well, we need to look at where we got to before the budget was passed last year. We had a $500 million surplus, and things seemed to be, had they stayed on that track, we would have been on better fiscal footing. Now with this tax cut, we're not going to be on that same footing. We need to go back and look at cutting the taxes that need to be cut, like property taxes, to make sure we're still not burdening our taxpayers. But we also need to look at making sure our taxes are fair and not benefiting the wealthy as they are under this new tax plan. We need to make sure that we can get our state back on to a sound financial track. We need to look at making sure that you mentioned sales tax, and we need to make sure that the sales tax increase probably it went up a cent a couple years ago. We need to make sure that sales tax is still needed. If so, what we can do to make sure it's there, but we don't want our state to become a high property tax, high sales tax state. I think income taxes are the taxes where people are seeing the least burden to their pocketbooks.
You're just advocating that Kansas should work toward decreasing property taxes, and on your campaign website you said that Kansas has seen their property taxes go up by 65% in the past decade. How would you work to lessen that burden on taxpayers?
I would help the local, there were proposals in the last session to help local governments with property tax relief. I think we need to look at that. Local governments are strained as they are. That's where they rely on their government rely on their funding for their governments is through property taxes. We need to make sure that they're not having to increase their property taxes to where they're taxing people out of their homes and out of their businesses. We need to make sure that property taxes are going to be going to have some relief and some help from the state.
If the new Kansas budget remains for next year and on forward, much of the increased spending on transportation and education will need to be funded somehow. And frequently the state has turned to, or historically the state has turned to property taxes to fund some of that. If you want to lessen property taxes, would that create some problems down the road?
No, I think if we if we get our income tax back into a balanced, responsible level, and instead of increasing taxes on the poor and lowering them for the rich, if we get to a balanced, progressive tax levels to where we were just a few years ago, I feel like we could get our state's fiscal situation back on track.
Well, right now we're going to go to some readers' questions. This first question is from Dean Katz, Superintendent of the Ottawa School District. Do you feel that public schools in Kansas are currently being adequately funded?
No, public schools in the state are not being adequately funded. We had a court case decision to come down back in, I believe, 2005 that said Kansas schools were not being adequately funded. A special session was called, and they restored our schools back to what was considered appropriate education. This is something that's in our Constitution, that schools have to be appropriately funded. With the economy collapsing a couple of years ago, our state had to make some tough decisions and cut our schools. However, with the 1 cent sales tax increase that was passed, it got our state back onto a better fiscal footing, and we were actually seeing budget surpluses last year to the tune of $500 million. We could have used that money to restore all the cut funds to schools and get our kids back into a situation where they're receiving appropriate education. So no, we're not seeing that, but that didn't happen. They decided to pass tax cuts for the wealthy instead of giving our kids a suitable education.
This next question is from Dale Reese. How do you feel about our Second Amendment and gun rights?
I feel like our Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights. It's pretty ironclad. You know, people have the right to bear arms, and I feel like the government shouldn't do anything to infringe upon that. I feel like we need to have responsible gun laws, but we need to make sure we're not overstepping the bounds. We need to respect the rights of gun owners.
This next question is from Rob McCallie. How would you fund public, a very broad question, how would you fund public education? How should it be funded?
Public education should be funded from the state. It should be funded not on the backs of the poor and middle class. It should be funded by a balanced approach through reasonable taxes.
In an unrelated question, Franklin County's fair is coming up, and I was just wondering if you have participated in the fair in the past, or what do you think about the county fair in general and its importance to the community?
The county fair is great. It's a long-time institution. I've gone to probably just about every fair in my lifetime. It's great. It's great to see the community come together. You get to see people have fun at the carnival. You get to see people show off their 4-H projects and show their animals and their livestock. I think the demolition derby and the rodeo are great times. It's just a great event, and I enjoy it. And I look forward to it every year.
You just mentioned 4-H a little bit, and many of the fair's activities relate to 4-H Club. What do you think of 4-H and its impact on Franklin County?
I think 4-H is great. I think it allows a lot of our traditions and our culture to be passed on from generation to generation. And I was never personally involved with it, but I have many friends who were, and I think it's a great positive program to have in the community.
And one last question that's pertinent to many of your potential constituents. Do you support Kansas Jayhawks or the Kansas State Wildcats?
I am a Kansas Jayhawk fan, but I do root for Kansas State when it comes time to the big bowl games and for the NCAA tournament, as long as they're not playing KU. I'm generally supportive of Kansas State Wildcats, but I am a Jayhawk fan at heart.
All right. All right, well, that concludes our interview with Caleb Correll, and thanks for watching.